Hi, I'm Dr. Raj Sundar, a family physician and a community organizer. You're listening to Healthcare for Humans, the show dedicated to educating you on how to care for culturally diverse communities so you can be a better healer. This is about everything that you wish you knew to really care for the person in front of you, not just a body system. Let's learn together. I'm excited to present a new series that's focused on what I call roots of care. I'm excited to work with Sophia, Rachel, and Lonnie for this Roots of Care series. You'll see the full video series on YouTube. This is an audio version, so feel free to go to YouTube to check out the video if that's accessible to you. I often reflect on how medicine has a habit of treating the body like a machine. Two joints that need to fit together, a number that needs to come down, LDL that sits at 72, the guidelines is 70, so we just focus on that 2. And I know there's a place for that because I work on lowering numbers every day. And I'm glad the medications exist. But when the number becomes the whole conversation, we lose the person it belongs to. We tell someone their body's broken and carrying a disease, when what their body is actually carrying is a history, or some parts of it. This is the first of 2 episodes from a conversation I had with 3 clinicians. Dr. Sophia Malik works at a community health center, and she was a previous guest in this podcast and is trained in somatic experiencing. Dr. Rachel Weiner is a friend and is also a family physician trained in compassion inquiry. Lonnie, lastly, is a clinical psychologist, a descendant of the Cherokee who spent decades researching health disparities across Indian country. You'll hear why the guideline number is the wrong place to stop, how history, land, and context keep living in the body long after the event, and what it costs a person when diagnosis stops being something they have and becomes someone they are. Here's part 1 of the episode with Sophia, Rachel, and Lonnie. Welcome back to the Healthcare for Humans podcast. I'm excited to be back with the Elite Collective in person and on video live with 3 other guests today. This will be the second part of the Roots of Care series. And I'm excited to have Sophia, Rachel, and Lonnie with me. I would love to hear a quick intro before we get started.
Yeah, thanks for having us. My name is Sophia Malik. I can tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up and raised in the South, but I've lived in Seattle for a little over 10 years now, and I work at a local community health center. And what I'm really interested in is how the conditions people live in, whether they are larger societal conditions or the conditions of the families they were brought up in, how that impacts their health, and how we can work together despite all of those challenges to change things for people for the better.
Rachel?
And my name is Rachel, and I'm a family physician here in Seattle as well, also originally from the South, from North Carolina. Yeah, I think similar to what Sophia was saying, I think I've thought for a long time around all of the pieces that influence health. And I think really have felt often the disconnect between my medical education and the way that we often provide care and what actually feels like it's really important and influential in patients' lives and in their health.
My name is Lonnie Nelson. I'm a clinical psychologist by training, a descendant of the Cherokee by way of the Melungeon communities in Roseville, Virginia, and Hancock County, Tennessee. For the last couple of decades, I've been engaged as a researcher in health disparities across Indian country, partnered with several tribes on topics ranging from retention and medication-assisted treatment for opioid use disorder, suicide prevention, risk and protective factors for Alzheimer's and related dementias among urban dwelling Native elders. Really just anything that my community partners want to work on, I'll figure out how to learn that field really quickly and how to be helpful.
I love that. Honestly, I have no idea where this conversation is going to go.
Let's find out.
Let's find out. I want to recap the first conversation we had. Last time I had listened to it, what resonated with me was an overarching theme of what does it mean for a person in a body taking care of another person in a body, focusing on the body part of this, because we actually shared a lot of our personal experiences
and how we retreated into intellectualization or maybe even disassociation, which was separate from the body while we were doing the work, and got into a space, maybe an uncomfortable space, at least for me, with self-reflection on how much do we go into this work itself from a place of woundedness, and how did that affect what we offer to our patients? That was our first episode. I'm sure there'll be many connection to it here. Part of what I was thinking about with this wonderful group was the idea that so much of what I hear in a current conversation about healthcare is that medicine knows what to do, our healthcare systems just don't deliver it to the right communities in the right place at the right time. So we know hypertension exists, we just don't diagnose it, nor get the treatment out there. And if we're able to do that, people will be better off. And oversimplification somewhat, but the conversation is medicine's doing everything. We just need to shift towards, figuring out how to deliver it. There's often side conversations, but it gets derailed by the wellness conversation and sometimes not taken seriously of what is holistic, quote unquote, health is. I'm giving that context because part of what's been really rewarding and meaningful talking to you all is making it feel real on how we often fall short in our current paradigm in what we deliver in medicine. And it's not something woohoo or we're like trying to sell people things, but like real felt experiences with your patients, your communities. And that has changed how you approach medicine itself and how you care for people. Long-winded explanation, but actually want to hear from maybe Sophia. I know you've focused on somatic experience a bit, but I want you to take it wherever you feel if it's right.
Okay. Yeah. A few things are coming to mind when you said that. The first is I want to say that, so we're recording on a Friday. So yesterday was Thursday. I was in clinic for 10 hours and I was in clinic the evening before. So all these experiences are fresh in my mind. So I'm not speaking from a place of theoretical ideas that I read in a book. The way I heard Gabor Mate phrase it once is there's evidence-based medicine, but there's also practice-based evidence. So, when you show up with people again and again and again, and you see 20 people in a day, and then you do it again, the next day, there's certain patterns that you start to see. I would say that even when you started speaking and, you were saying something about like the body, how about our bodies, as what I may call physical care providers, were really thought of as, in some ways, I don't want to say a mechanic, but in a sense of like there's very mechanical things that we're expected to address, which absolutely has its place. And we do that as it's needed. But there's often more to people than just where these two joints fit together. So that's the part I think that we're trying to explore a little bit more today.
It makes me think of the metaphor body as a machine. And maybe that's how we approach medicine, which is incorrect.
Yeah, actually, when you were asking that question earlier, this idea of like, okay, there's the care that we need to provide and we just needed to get it to people. That made me think very much of this like mechanistic model. And of course, we're in a moment of like grappling with AI. So that comes to mind too of like, oh, it's just this algorithmic care. And if we could just get it to everybody, we could all be healthy. And I do think the humanity and relationship is missing in that conversation. And I think hypertension as an example, it's okay if everyone who had hypertension could just be on these medications that are inexpensive and have been around for a long time, that's the solution. But I think that misses so much of the story of an individual who's coming in with high blood pressure, of what's the story that's led them to have high blood pressure, and what's the story that makes it maybe hard for them to take medications? What's the story of their relationship with healthcare? And there's so much there that, like you were saying, can't be simplified. But I think often we do think of solutions in these mechanistic ways that don't account for ourselves or the patients as whole people.
Yeah. So it resonates with me because in hypertension and high cholesterol, there's been new guidelines, if you're keeping up with this, which
yes,
is
I am.
like more people are affected by this condition. We need to treat earlier with medication. So, for example, without getting to the clinical stuff here, hypertension, everybody should be below 130/80. When I first heard that, I was like, that's like everybody that I see in a day. And is the goal just to give them a medication so we can move on?
Something that I deal with a lot in my work at tribal communities is the notion of social determinants of health, and specifically historical and contextual determinants of health. And just thinking about the context in which a person operates. Like, are they, for 16 hours of the day when they're awake, are they subjected to a society in which racist views are dominant and they feel ongoing hostility from all around them at all times? And very much as a psychologist, I'm thinking, it's going to raise a person's blood pressure, right? So is the problem in the person then that you can just medicate it? Or are you going to run into cases of hypertension like mine, where I'm on like 4 different antihypertensives and I still have hypertension? It just brings that to mind for me. I don't think that there can be a purely mechanistic solution, that you can't medicate me under 130.
Right.
Unless I'm comatose. It's not going to happen.
I appreciate you sharing that, both sharing your personal story, but also about the larger context. A patient said something to me similarly before. They had actually been in the emergency room, but there had been some kind of altercation with security, which is a whole other topic, but actually deeply what we're talking about, and when he came in to see me, I asked him if he wanted blood pressure medications. And actually it was like the encounter flipped, and it was like I was the one receiving the healing that day. And he was just like, let me tell you about my life and my experience. And he went all the way back to talking about colonialism. And then he talked about his own experience, interacting with police. And he said, well, if you put someone in a cage, don't you think their pressure would be high?
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah. And especially considering Indigenous communities, and you can definitely speak more to this, but if we consider the context in which people were living in relationship with land, where really the people are the land, and then somebody comes in and says, actually, this is mine. The violence required to insist over years of settler colonialism that this is mine, there's an inherent violence in that. So violence, even when you think of it, there's almost like this force to it. There's this fire. There's a lot of tension, a lot of constriction, and there's a lot of rage if you are faced with that. Yeah. And rage with no direction, when there's that level of constriction, that eventually will show up in your arteries, in your arterioles. And then when we find the calcifications, we can act as if those were going to be there. And maybe to some extent they were. But what was turning on that? Maybe you had the predisposition to heart disease, but what turned it on? What flared it up? So this is deeply important, and the thing about the guidelines that really frustrates me is, there's a lot, but first of all, I want to say that people who are doing this research about that, their work is very important. And a lot of these people are incredibly intelligent, and I've learned from many of them. And in no way what I'm saying is saying that that's not needed or that that's silly. I think it's when those of us receiving the information, when we get really stuck in the details of it, we have to be at this number. And even when I sit with patients and we're reviewing their labs, it's very stuck on the specific number, and we kind of lose the person for the number.
Yeah. LDL under 70. You're at 72. So we're going to get it lower.
And it deeply scares people, actually. Yeah. It deeply frightens people to see those abnormal numbers. And then that fear kind of keeps them from addressing other issues.
I'm often thinking about how we ended up here. And is one part of this, it's just the sphere of influence. Even patients appreciate when we bring it down to something that feels controllable. Right. Can't control the racism, the colonialism, violence, but we can talk about this number here. both of us look together and talk about the medication. So it feels a sense of agency and control when the ultimate cause of it is so outside of our control. Is that okay? Or is that part of how we ended up here? And does that make it okay? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think the danger in that approach of what happens is that all of these external factors, like the fact that we live in a society that feels dangerous for everybody, and I think in it, and particularly like even more so for certain populations. Like I'm sitting today thinking about the like trans woman UW student who was killed last weekend. Like there's so many of those histories, like mirrored histories in various communities where there's this really tangible sense of like being in danger as you walk through the world. But even for people who have privilege in this society, there's this constant message of you have to continue performing, you have to continue producing, you have to do a good job at your job. There's always precariousness. We live in a precarious society. When someone comes in and they have a high cholesterol and we give them a diagnosis of hyperlipidemia, and we're not having that conversation, I think what it does is it places that societal dysfunction in an individual body. And I think it has the potential then to naturalize it to a certain degree of this is something wrong with your body. This is a diagnosis. It's a disease that you're carrying within you. And I think it gives the message then that it's like, okay, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that happens so often in my field, mental health, right? Yeah. Like, does this person have depression or anxiety? Or are they having a perfectly reasonable reaction to living in a society that is inherently violent and really is out to get them?
Yeah.
Yeah. And one version of that I see sometimes is not just do I have depression, but am I depression? Or I am ADHD.
Right.
So identity, you were mentioning working with Indigenous communities and people have various other identities. You mentioned gender identity. So we have so many ways to identify ourselves in our relationship, in our roles that we play in our families or in our communities. But I've just seen there's certain patterns you notice as you do this work. And I've really noticed this pattern of the disease label becoming an identity. And it's a really tricky thing and something that I think we need to have more conversations about, patients and providers alike. Part of it is people have not been heard for possibly their entire life. And for example, I saw this patient the other day. They have many, many diagnoses, and they were talking about how there was a recent diagnosis they received and they felt very validated. And again, this is not unique to this patient. I've had this conversation with many people, but the reason they said it felt validating was doctors told me before I had no reason to be in pain. So now that I have a label, there's a reason for me to be in pain. And my guess is for people like that is that's been the case their whole life. We're probably in their family of origin when they weren't feeling well or they were tired or they were scared. Like that, they were told, oh, don't be sad. Or maybe the message was so strong to not even express it. I was in New York City once and my kids, we had been traveling all day and my kids were just crying. We were waiting for our dumplings order to arrive. And this New Yorker, he turns to me and he's like, it's your fault your kids are like that. And he went on. He was like, my father, we would never do that. And we would know better. I said to him, that sounds really terrifying. And he kind of... It was like, no, it wasn't terrifying. And as soon as they got their food, they were quiet and they were like little birds eating their little dumplings and they just needed food. But the idea that even like to cry when I'm hungry, that level of not being validated builds over life. And there's no doubt if you grow up with that. And then when you go to a doctor, it's, first of all, terrifying to go see, whether it's a mental health care provider or a physical care provider, it's terrifying. And there's so much shame and other history people are bringing in. And then if the doctor misses you that day and tells you, nothing's wrong with you, or that's the way you hear it when they say that, the diagnosis can start to carry this currency, this value of like, no, I have this thing. And there is value in diagnosis. And I think we talked about that a little bit in the last podcast we did.
Yeah.
So I'm not dismissing that. I just think this piece of it is something we don't talk enough about.
Is it a universal need for people to understand why? And diagnosis gives them an answer. But I've had a lot of patients wanting an adult autism diagnosis to explain why it's felt so hard for them. And getting that testing, or it comes in waves, Ehlers-Danlos. There's all these diagnoses that people are seeking. ADHD can be specifically validating for folks of like, that's why I'm suffering so much. Is there a way to bring in, Rachel, you made really good points. Is there so many different ways we just default to the diagnosis for either patients, our convenience, the system is pushing us, or just incorporating the bigger picture? And what is our role once we've identified it? Because, we did this for social determinants of health. There's an ICD code for inadequate community resources, transportation inability, housing problem. So now you have hypertension and 4 other diagnoses for social determinants of health. And I'll still give you the listener pro. We'll keep going.
From the cultural worldview that I come from, you can't separate out a person's physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, environmental well-being. That's all one thing. And so it would make sense that you would note that there are these contextual problems, housing problems, was one example.
Mm-hmm.
If you have to assign an ICD code to it, okay, fine. But the fact that it's now included in the conceptualization of the person as a complete entity, I think is a step in the right direction, And I guess that speaks to this holistic picture of health, right? Where can a person truly be unhealthy if they're living in a toxic dump? Probably not.
Mm-hmm.
Can a person truly be healthy if they have not been validated their entire life for their feelings of hunger, which is a basic human experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Probably not, So if something is not going right in any one of those domains or multiple of those domains, or the interrelations between them and cascading effects and feedback loops and all that occurs between those different levels, then you're going to get disharmony in the overall picture. You're going to get dysfunction. You're going to get dysregulation.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that we commonly in Western culture call that disease states of different kinds. But the fact of the matter is that those sources can't be separated out. It's all one thing. There really is, I hate to use the buzzword, but there's one health for, a given individual or a given community even.
Okay.
Right. Can a community truly be healthy if 10% of its population is homeless? Probably not, right? And so that's a situation we find ourselves in Seattle, right, where we have these encampments that people don't want them in their backyards. And so every once in a while, the police do a raid and clean up everything and move people someplace they don't want to be. But we haven't provided a sufficient safety net to give those people a comfortable place to be. Right. And so as a community, that's a disharmony that we're experiencing. And it's a real, tangible problem, for the health of the community as a whole.
I think this word that Lonnie used, dysregulation, is really key, because one time I was speaking to someone and it was interesting. I had not mentioned trauma or anything. I had just asked about any recent change. Have you had any recent changes in your life? But, they replied, no, this isn't about trauma. And it was so interesting because we were talking, and I think we had a conversation about when people assert something that you haven't asked, it's definitely important to them. And for me, it's not to call this person out or to laugh at them, but it's just, I think we're all laughing because we all do that. And what they had said was, this is a physiological issue. And so for me, going through the somatic experiencing training it's a program with Somatic Experiencing International, but it's like a modality developed by Peter Levine that relates, really, I would say it's a way to think of ourselves almost as animals and to think of how our nervous systems respond to stressors. And in the wild, when an animal is under stress, it can either fight or run away, and then it can, shake and resolve and kind of like come back. In human life, we can't really, to some extent, we also do those things, but because of our socialization, we can't fully enact a lot of our survival responses. So, and then sometimes it's not a huge trauma or a huge event. It can sometimes be things that are very subtle that can happen. When something has happened where either the event was too overwhelming to your system, or it was a small event, but you didn't have enough support, that response that you would have had didn't get to happen. And that kind of lingers in your system. And this is where it becomes a physiological issue. If you can have the event, have some type of response, release it, and come back to a balance, then you can stay in this kind of homeostasis of sorts. But if you don't have that opportunity, that thing is still kind of ringing in your system. And often these things have happened so long ago and could be even intergenerational, something that got passed down from a previous generation. This is the bedrock for symptoms. And so symptoms start occurring. And over time, if those symptoms aren't addressed, if the right support isn't present, then symptom develops into disease, develops into syndrome. And the way that this is physiological is, we all have a nervous system, and our nervous system is connected with our endocrine system, and all of our hormones are related to that, and all of our organs respond based on our hormones and our nerves. This is how the body is not separate from our environment. This really is a physiological response that's happening.
Yeah, well, you said one part can't really be separated out.
Yeah, there's one body. Yeah, one health. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
One health, yeah.
Is there something with the social determinants of health that we're still missing? I feel like with our tendency to...
Yes.
For me, you don't hear about land, that much connection to land. And I feel like it's really, anytime I talk to Indigenous communities, Pacific Islander, Native, that connection is so strong. And to creatures, salmon come up a lot, like this feeling of earth and this living world, which is still a huge gap in the social determinants of health.
Traditionally, the connection to the land, that was your lifeline, right? That was your food source. Mm-hmm. That was your medicine source. That was your source for shelter. If you were not connected to the land that you were a part of, you weren't going to last long. Mm-hmm. Something I say in my workshops, our ancestors were pragmatists. They didn't persist in doing things that served no purpose. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. And so maintaining that kind of relationship to the land and one's environment, it is really key to like every Indigenous culture that I'm aware of, because that's basic survival. That if you don't do that, again, you don't last long. Mm-hmm. And I think that modern culture or Western modern culture has really divorced people from their relationship with the land. If you need food, you go to the supermarket. You don't go hunting. Mm-hmm. You don't go foraging, right? You go to Safeway, or Whole Foods if you're lucky. Yeah. But it's a relationship that has been devalued to a point that I think people are numb to its absence. Like if you lose an appendage, you don't always have phantom pain. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I would say that's kind of what I observe in the world at this point. So yeah, I think you're right. And noting that relationship to the land is important and is somehow dysregulated in today's world in Western culture. I would say it's not just dysregulated, it's gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm currently reading Indigenous scholar Vine Deloria's book, The World We Used to Live In. And he took histories of medicine men. And it's a really beautiful collection of narratives of how medicine men received their gifts. And there's more in the book than that. But one aspect of it is, people were observed by, there was this belief in spirits and the spirit world, and spirits and animals were watching to see how are you interacting with the world around you, because not just everyone was given these gifts of healing. And one of the stories that I was really touched by was somebody, they had a vision in which they communicated with the spirit world. And in that, they spoke with ants. And ants were their friends. And I just thought about how I think about ants as such a nuisance that I would never approach an ant cell. But the idea of, I don't know, there's crazy stats on ants, compared to humans on the earth. They're pretty important. But this idea that there's this communication with not just animals, but insects and ancestors. And these were the people who brought healing to their communities. And for me, in 2026, I don't even have a window in the area that I work. So there is a window in the clinic, and there's a couple. And I have to make an effort throughout the day to go find that window. And if I'm lucky, I pause long enough to see a leaf blow in the wind. So that is
I'm so sorry.
It's reality for a lot of us.
It's reality for a lot of us. And I'm lucky even that there is a nice park and that there's nice trees nearby and that I can connect. But this is the contrast of the level of connection with our larger ecosystems versus the reality of being on Epic and just being locked in on the computer,
When my family moved back to the west side of the state from having lived over in Spokane or outside of Spokane for a few years, I told my wife, I was no closer than 30 minutes to town. Yeah. I don't want to be any closer than a half an hour.
Yeah.
Because I can't live like that.
Yeah.
I have to be in the woods. For many years, I lived in Central Seattle. We had a house in the Central District.
Oh.
And it is so much less stressful for me to be observed by the forest and the wildlife than to be observed by neighbors that live less than 50 feet away.
Sure.
Interesting. Yeah. It's connected to healthcare overall, this land, but also devaluing of space. You talked about the windows. I think of the institutions that I've worked at where all the walls are white with fluorescent lights. There's a sterility to it, I think, for standardization, which people love standardization in healthcare. And to control it, to make it consistent, and they would say reliable to everybody. But spaces aren't always like that, and land isn't like that. It's this, I'm deep into this meditation, and there's this idea of a concept is a concept, but it's not reflective of reality. If I say a leaf, what comes to your mind? And I don't know, whatever comes to your mind is completely inaccurate because leaves could be so many different shapes and colors. Even green, there's so many shades of green. So there's so many nuances to this. But going back to that idea of controlling space to look the same for everywhere, and does that also affect how our patients feel maybe processed through the system, right?
I want to go back to something you said. You said everybody loves standardization in healthcare. I would say no, the accountants love standardization. The physicians, the nurses, the medical assistants, none of them really appreciate standardization all that much.
That's true, yeah.
It's really the accountants that like the standardization and the payers.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
This is something I've thought about in healthcare a number of times, but it often will be presented with something to say okay, this is the best option. The evidence is behind this. But it's we don't pause to ask well, what were the questions we were asking when we collected this evidence? What questions were we asking when we did a survey of patients to decide this is the best option? And I feel we're often not asking the question of when you walk into this office, what's going to help you feel safe? Like, what's going to help your nervous system feel calm? And those are prerequisites to healing. Like, we can't heal if we don't feel safe. But nobody designing a hospital is asking that question.
Yeah.
Someone designing our clinic isn't asking, like, what's going to help someone walk into this room and feel at ease?
I don't think I've ever been into an exam room that felt like a healing space.
No. Rarely. Yeah.
It's so far, the most recent conversation I had was we're trying to make it more pediatrics friendly. So stickers on the wall. And the talking point from somebody who didn't want it was, well, what if a patient needs to get a cancer diagnosis? They don't want to see like stickers and things like on the walls. And we got stuck there. But it's like, I don't even know how far we are from that question asking because we're all the way here on this thing. I don't even know how to name it.
Or maybe pediatric friendly environments don't mean cartoon characters on the wall.
Yeah.
Maybe a pediatric friendly environment has warm lighting, a nice temperature, maybe some soft music in the background, and doesn't require Mickey Mouse at all.
Yeah.
No. That's not necessary to make a kid feel comfortable. Right? A kid will feel comfortable and safe if the environment feels comfortable and safe.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be entertaining.
Yeah. It's going back to that. Are we asking the right questions? Maybe we already have a solution of kids like cartoons, right?
Right. That's an
and
assumption.
Stickers, right?
Yeah. That's an assumption.
Yeah.
I think what you're naming, like what helps a kid feel safe is what helps a human feel safe. Yeah.
So it doesn't have to contrast. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest roles that we play as providers is helping to build that container of safety. I think it's tricky because there's a part of me that doesn't want to talk about that more, because then whenever there's more tools that are shared, that can become a thing of like, well, create a container of safety. Now do that and see these 30 patients. And so at the same time, I think for me, part of healing, or the crux of healing in these difficult conditions, is where is that space, like that kind of edge, that narrow place where there is something that I can do. Yes, there is a lot of violence in the world, but a view that the world is dangerous, period, is trauma. That's the way that we see when we are living with trauma. Mm-hmm. And so as I've gone through my own healing process, being able to see there are people who are trustworthy. There are places where I can not be hypervigilant, working on maybe I can even rest sometimes. Like, what does rest feel like in my body? It's funny that we mentioned kids. I saw a few kids yesterday. It was actually really nice because there was like a lot of children on my schedule. And one kid in particular, they were pretty sick, and meaning they had like a ear infection. And even in their ill state, there were things that I could do. It's funny, I did grab some stickers, but she was not interested in them. I actually did not know. But what helped was I waited. I sat there, and it was very clear in the beginning that she was afraid, and I think had been in the ER before and had a difficult experience. And so I had to check with myself. Am I trying to get information from this kid? Am I trying to make a diagnosis? And so I just sat there for a while and I observed them. How are they breathing? How are they moving around the room? And eventually they actually first started playing near their mom. And then she kind of came closer and started tapping on my computer, which was fine. The computer was locked, so it was okay. And so they were actually kind of close to me. And then I could put my stethoscope on them. It was, what was my system doing? And co-regulation is really important. Co-regulation, when a baby is born, they don't really have the ability to soothe themselves. They rely on their caregiver for that. And over time, they develop more ability as the nervous system matures to do that. So those initial days, weeks, months, years, our pattern for how we learn how our nervous system regulates, we learn that in that co-regulating relationship with our caregiver. That sets our template for how we regulate in the future. And it's possible if you didn't really get helpful support when you were an infant, it's possible for your system to learn that anew. And that's a big part of what is offered through somatic experiencing and probably some other modalities as well. But that's why I think despite everything that happens, what we offer when we come in is so important. I do think that physicians and mental health providers need so much more support. And my hope is even just having a conversation and normalizing some of these things, that's part of it. There are a lot of unsafe things in the world, but also it's possible to find safety within yourself and really reflect that such that others can also find it.
I just want to share an experience I had a couple of years ago. I was at the Tulsa airport, believe it or not. And I was pretty early for my flight back to Seattle.
Yeah.
And so I was just exploring, and I found a wonderful thing at the Tulsa airport. It was called a sensory room.
Oh, good.
They had one at the Tulsa airport. Go figure, right out. But I go into this room and I'm like, what's this? And I figured clearly it's for people that have difficulty in regulating their responses to sensory inputs. Everything in the room was adjustable.
Yeah.
The light levels were adjustable.
Yeah.
The sound levels were adjustable. There were multiple seating options for different levels of softness or hardness.
Yeah.
You could lie down on a mat over in the corner.
Yeah.
It was the safest place I'd ever been to that point in my life.
Yeah.
It felt so serene. Like you could make it comfortable for you.
Right.
Yes.
And you were able to take advantage of it.
I was there early enough that I was able to hang out in there for 30 minutes before my flight. And I was able to just sit and rest and be like, this is such an odd feeling. It felt good, right? But it also felt foreign, right?
Absolutely.
And so I just had to share that.
Because I think in the healing process, so trauma causes constriction.
Mm-hmm.
And we learn, I can speak for myself, I learned to live in this much space.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still working on it, but just this idea of, is it okay to feel good? Can I feel good about feeling good? Am I worthy of comfort? And in the early phases of doing this work, one of the biggest steps is just finding one sensation that's not painful or is less painful. Because to jump to comfort or relaxation is too much for a lot of people's systems.
Yeah.
And so to just be like, where in my body right now do I have slightly less pain? And I have definitely experienced chronic pain. It's something that's improved a lot. But I know, just where are all the places that are hurting right now is so easy to recognize. But with time, experiencing some amount of comfort and then maybe one day really feeling like a pleasant sensation in your body. And that is something that I do think is available to most of the people that we work with. And so when I see people, I try to not just see, here's this list of diagnoses or wow, here's this really traumatized person, or I don't know, there can be so many judgments, but I kind of see the possibility of what could be different, not in a way to pressure them on that, but just to keep in my perspective, they don't always have to be that way. Going back to that disease of identity thing, they don't have to be pain for the rest of their life. They don't have to be uncontrolled blood sugar or discomfort. And they can be something else. And what do they want to be? Helping figure out with them, what do you want to be? How do you want to be different? And I consider that to be really an honor to be able to sit with people in that. And I even just feel really touched thinking about it. That's really a privilege that we get to sit with people and explore that possibility with them.
Yeah. Thinking about, I told you I didn't know where this conversation was going. We talked about ants. We're here.
That was a meme.
We talked about diagnosis. We talked about imperfections. We talked about the context and how that's relevant, including the lived world, I'll say land, social determinants of health, ancestors, maybe spiritual part to that too, how that's connected to the nervous system, dysregulation specifically.
As always, thank you for listening to Healthcare for Humans. If you've found any value in this podcast, I have 2 quick requests. 1, please leave a review in the podcast app that you're listening to my voice in right now. It really helps others discover the show. 2, share this episode with anyone who you think might benefit from it. For easy access to all our episodes and to support the podcast, visit www.healthcareforhumans.org. There you'll find our content clearly organized, topics, countries, themes, to help you choose what to listen to next. Until next time, this is Dr. Raj Sundar, reminding you that culturally responsive care leads to better patient outcomes. See you again soon.